Chaps Unite.
Chaps Unite.
Chaps Unite. Chaps Unite.
Chaps Unite against racism.
Good afternoon and welcome to our roundtable. What does equity truly mean at College of DuPage? I'm Lauren Morgan. I am chair of the Speech Communication Department and a faculty member in speech here at College of DuPage. And today's participants include COD President Dr. Brian Caputo, Associate Vice President of Assessment and Student Success Lisa Stock, Equity Team Chair and English Department faculty member Jill Salas, Associate Vice President of Academic Partnerships and Learning Resources, Cynthia Sims, and Interim Dean of Arts, Communication, and Hospitality, Anthony Ramos. In the spring of 2019, Dr. Caputo began leading the Equity Initiative by joining the Illinois Equity and Attainment Partnership. The consortium of 29 higher education institutions are committed to the partnership's goal of eliminating racial and socioeconomic achievement gaps by 2025. Through this work, the College of DuPage has developed its own equity plan in conjunction with the Guided Pathways model. So this afternoon, we'll be discussing the Equity Initiative and what it means for both our campus and our community. So Dr. Caputo, I'd like to start with a question to you. You've taken the lead on this initiative and you've joined forces with the ILEA partnership. So can you share with us the purpose of COD's Equity Initiative and the goals attached to it?
Certainly. So the Illinois Equity and Attainment Initiative really fits very nicely within the overall Pathways framework. That is, it's all about student success. With respect to our equity plan and our ILEA involvement, we are really primarily focused on completion of a degree. But that's not the only measure of success. Certainly persistence and transfer to other institutions are measures of success. But beyond that, what we're trying to do is to close achievement gaps. If you look at some of the success statistics of our white students compared to our students of color and some of our economically disadvantaged students, there are gaps. Some gaps are bigger than others. And really what this program is all about is trying to close those gaps through a variety of different strategies. Certainly among them, what we're trying to do is improve our delivery of student support services, such as onboarding, such as advising, such as the delivery of student financial aid. Really a holistic approach to trying to help all of our students succeed and close those achievement gaps.
And I wanted to ask the rest of the panelists, are there any specific elements you'd like to expand upon that Dr. Caputo mentioned?
Well, I would just say that I think his conversation about it being very in line with Pathways, and I'll probably have a little bit to say about that later, and that it enhances and Pathways, Guided Pathways and the national model from AACC has equity at its heart. So this is coming at us at just the right time because it really extends and makes much more intentional the work that we were doing already, and it really shines a light on it, I think.
Well, that's great. And Lisa, I'd like to ask, how does the COD plan tie back to the goals of ILEA, and how will this impact our communities?
Sure. So in a lot of ways, some of the things that Dr. Caputo talked about is that we're seeing nationally and of course in our state, the big gaps that we have in attainment. Well, at COD, we had already established some targets to look at the attainment of our Black, Latinx, and our low-income students through the Pathways and through the Provost Office. So it aligns so closely with the work that we're doing in helping all of our students succeed, and particularly looking at those students that are falling behind. Our plan really aligns with the ILEA plan because they ask institutions to flesh out 2 to 3, maybe 4 particular strategies that they were going to employ, and that is what we have done. And so in our plan, we are particularly focusing on professional development around equity, human resources processes and services, and also bringing together a physical space eventually, but particularly services and community around students of color, so that we will enhance what we already have in our Latin outreach and our Hispanic outreach and our diversity office to be a more inclusive service for students.
No, Lauren, it might be helpful just to add, we talk about these gaps, that the gaps exist on average. In other words, we're looking at white students on average, students of color on average, Pell versus non-Pell. That's how we distinguish the socioeconomic, the economic, I should say, the economic classifications on average. This is not to say that all students of color are doing not as well as white students or vice versa. These are just averages. We need to be clear about that, because some of our students of color are really doing quite well. It's a matter of circumstance and so on and so forth.
Yes, I wanted to emphasize that and say that it's really important to make that distinction, because when we talk about equity and diversity, we hear about some of the negatives of groups versus the positives. So we don't want to present a picture that our students of color and our first generation students and all of our marginalized students are doing poorly. They're not. Some are doing better than others, and some need help, but it will benefit the whole institution. So thank you, President Caputo, for making that distinction.
And so Anthony, Cynthia, and Jill, you all have extensive backgrounds working in higher education and working with students from different backgrounds, various backgrounds. So what types of ideas are the committees exploring, and what impact do they hope are going to be achieved?
Well, I can start, Lauren. I'll share from the subcommittee that Jill and I have been leading, which is the Human Resources Process Subteam. We've had a lot of great conversations across various employee groups of the college that are part of the committee. So we have representation from faculty, staff, administration to talk about what are our processes for recruiting and retaining and building a diverse workforce for the college. And a lot of our work initially spent looking at research, looking at the literature in the field that talked about how representation matters and how for students to be able to see themselves in the staff and faculty that are supporting them in their success. And so we've had some critical conversations about what are our opportunities to attract a diverse workforce in our applicant pools. What are we currently doing, taking an assessment of our current practices and thinking about how are we more intentional about bringing equity into the conversation, that it is a value, that it is something that is a driving force in our strategic initiatives at the college. And so thinking about when we invite folks to join our faculty, to join our staff or our administration, how are we engaging them in those practices? Where are we recruiting? Are we looking at professional and academic organizations when we are recruiting, say, a faculty member in a particular discipline? Within that organization, is there a subgroup of academics of particular backgrounds that we can encourage to apply for positions we may have open? From a interviewing standpoint, what type of training and professional development are we providing for our search committee members around implicit bias, to learning about how to ask questions related to equity and the types of responses that would determine a good fit and alignment of values with the institution from the responses that we may get from candidates. And so thinking about how do we ask candidates about, for example, help me to understand how you define equity and how does that play out in your teaching and learning practices in the classroom or in your support of students from an advising standpoint, perhaps. So there are many opportunities for us to have this engagement with potential candidates. And so the HR process subteam is looking at a number of processes that impact how we recruit, how we retain. We're also having critical conversations about how do we develop from within? How do we think about a person's longevity at the college and what development opportunities so we can help aspiring leaders and members of our internal communities grow and develop to leadership roles within the institution as well.
Cynthia and Jill, what would you like to add?
Yes, so President Caputo mentioned student success, and one of the best ways to ensure student success is to make sure that they have a safe space to gather, to learn, to feel like they belong. And so the committee that I serve on is the Equity Resource Center team. So Lisa mentioned that we are submitting a proposal to President Caputo and the board, and we're happy to have the support of our president as we submit this proposal. He has met with the team to give us some feedback, some suggestions to strengthen the proposal. But basically, it's a team of 5 students. And I'm happy to say that one of the students is the student trustee on the board, giving us great feedback of what we should include in the center, who we should serve. And so we're proposing to combine some of the programs we already have. So that's the Latino Outreach Center and the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion. We would like to do this by next semester. But we're working on a mission and a vision, and we're gathering information from students because this is for them. But we don't want to leave out faculty and staff. We're going to ask staff to, once the center is approved, ask them to come and share their experiences, give workshops, have activities that engage all students. You know, we can't have a center for diversity, equity, and inclusion and not include all students. So this is for everyone. So we'll be promoting that and including all populations. So we're working with facilities to come up with a plan for where this center will be, how large it should be, whose offices will be in this center. And so we're going to review some data just to ensure that we know enough about our population to have the services that we propose. And then we'll submit that document to President Caputo, who will tell us that he loves it, hopefully, or give us some feedback to make some changes so that it is strong as it goes before the Board of Trustees.
Right.
So we're excited about that.
I might just add that really the primary function of that sub-team is being outlining what the purpose is of this center and how it's better or different from what we've got now. So that's something I think that will be compelling with the Board of Trustees. They understand what we're gaining by establishing a center like this.
Yes, I mean, we have a literature review. I was responsible for that. So I have literature that shows the impact of a center like this on student learning, on student outcomes, on social interaction among all groups. So we don't want silos. We want everyone to come and enjoy and learn as a group. And so this is founded in research. It's not just something we want, but something that we know works, and it will include best practices that have been studied.
Cynthia, in that research, since you mentioned a couple of items, is there any particular element that stands out as sort of a hallmark that says, this is what contributes to student success?
Yes, when students feel safe and that they belong, they are retained longer. So they want to come to school. They want to see their friends. They want to see their faculty members and administrators because they feel safe. They feel like they are being included. And so they have a place where they can be themselves. And it's not exclusionary. That's it. Sometimes a diversity center is seen as something for them, for those students. But this center is for everyone because we learn from each other. So when that happens, students are retained and they perform at a higher rate as well. And that's been studied for years. This is not new. This dates back to the 60s when it was a separate center for Black students, for Latino students, for women. And it has evolved into centers for everyone.
Okay.
And it's very beneficial.
And I'm curious, and maybe all of you might be able to speak to this. What is different at this time? If Cynthia, you know, if she just said this has been around for a long time, what's different about now from prior efforts?
Maybe I'll start. And I think really this is, again, is an outgrowth of pathways. We've become more focused, I think, as an institution on what constitutes student success. How do we get there? It's our central pillar. And then as some of the academic leadership brought to me this idea of joining ALEA, it seemed to fit very well. But this is something that we have been for the last year or more on trying to advance student success and helping those students that are having difficulty in trying to figure out what it is that where the problem is and trying to address it.
Well, I think too, the evolution of community colleges, we were founded on the hallmarks of access, that we are a point of open access for education. And I think as the mission of community colleges have been evolving to embrace success and access and just the evolution. I mean, community colleges have not been around as long as some of our, four-year institutions, for example. And so as our mission has been evolving and we're taking a critical look at our service to the community, I mean, we are the community's college, and what is our responsibility in that, and thinking about what is our responsibility to provide a strong workforce, to provide education, to prepare folks for transfer, and then taking a critical look at who we're serving, our outcomes, our data being reflective about what we represent, why we do this work, who are we serving, and what can we do to provide the best outcomes for our students. I think it's kind of the combination of all of those things. And I know the Center for Community College Research has been talking a lot about how Pathways is in some ways considered a whole college redesign process, as taking critical looks at onboarding, progress, all the way through completion and transfer, and looking at all the different points where there are opportunities to better support students. And so I think as we're evolving as a field of higher education in the community college world, that we have a lot of opportunities to really think about our mission, our purpose, and how do we allocate our resources, our expertise, our passion to support students in their success and really have these critical conversations.
Okay. And since Anthony just mentioned college redesign and evolving opportunities, Jill, this is a question for you. Considering the opportunity or the equity gaps, what are those equity gaps, and what kinds of opportunities, tools, resources are being collected in order to eliminate those gaps, especially for Latinx, Black, and under-resourced students?
Sure. I think that, looking at the numbers, and as Lisa stated before, the 19% gap among Black students, Latinx 7%, and Pal 5%. We really wanted to explore and get a better understanding of the reasons for that. Piggybacking off of Cynthia's astute comment about how when we talk about equity and we talk about offering specialized resources, it tends to convey the sense that it originates out of a deficit theory, right? That, well, we have to support these students because they're not as academically prepared. They don't have as strong reading or writing ability, which is simply not true. And, instead framing it rather from the approach of, a social justice perspective, understanding that there's systemic barriers in our society that put these students on, the lower rung of the ladder, right? They have a higher ladder to climb than more affluent students or white students. One of the things too that we have to understand, particularly about community college attendance, is that a lot of our students tend to transfer without earning the credential. That certainly does play a role in the reason for some of these equity gaps, but speaking more broadly to that social justice issue, in fact, our team had explored yesterday in a really dynamic exercise the impact of the digital divide. A lot of us make the assumption that internet access and laptop and device access is widespread among all classes of our society, which isn't true either. And I think that what some of the teams are working on and what we're exploring is a deeper dive into our students' access to these types of resources that make them successful. Another example might be, and I can speak on my behalf, I fall into these categories. I'm Black, I'm Latina, I was low income when I attended college. I lack that college knowledge, right? The ability to navigate complex institutions. So I think that's another contributing factor. As we mentioned earlier, it's not the leading reason why we have these gaps. When you mentioned, Lauren, the reference to why now, why is this important? I think one factor that's really made that mountain higher to climb is the impact of the pandemic. And I don't know if you've seen numerous, I know I have seen numerous articles and reports about how the pandemic has disproportionately affected members of the Black, Latinx, low-income populations in our country. They're disproportionately more underemployed, unemployed. I know that I've lost quite a few students from my spring semester due to the pandemic. They had to take care of family. They had to drop classes and take on more hours at their job to support the family. They've had to take care of siblings. And I think that all of our team's work kind of emphasizes that holistic approach. So as Anthony mentioned, the processes related to recruitment and retention of employees of color, and Cynthia had mentioned the comprehensive center to serve all students. I think that the other resources and tools that contribute toward eliminating these gaps is our PD. So we're offering professional development that, you know, we're toying with the idea of offering a certificate, diversity and inclusion certificate. A lot of organizations across the country are expecting applicants to submit diversity statements, right? You know, and I think that's our next direction to go in. Another tool that I think will be very useful for us, again, because we're a large organization, is hiring an outside consultant. Sometimes you need that different perspective. We're so used to maybe following the same processes that we've been used to, right? Just keep turning those wheels, but having somebody else come in and taking a look around and with a fresh pair of eyes, I think is another tool at our disposal. Another thing that we're seeing is an increasing need, again, speaking to our large size, right? In large institutions, students fall through the cracks, and that's simply because we've got areas that have such distinct processes and procedures. And to Cynthia's point earlier, the tendency to silo the work gets exacerbated the larger the organization. And we've got folks coming together from the foundation, from financial aid, from admissions, from the cashier's office to kind of get together and say, how can we work together to better support the communication of emergency resources, improve students' access to funding, showing them additional resources in the community, being more proactive with our referral processes. Advertising the fuel pantry, I think, is another underutilized resource that we can better market to students. Other things that I think in terms of a tool that have contributed to our directions is data. I think that a lot of times we tend to guess what our issues are and move forward and think that that's going to make a difference. But really taking that time to look at data, I think has helped us move forward with making the right decisions and taking the right next steps.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask, since Jill brought up the complications of the pandemic that seem to be both revealing perhaps equity gaps in a different way, but also sort of layering on top of the work that's happening. How are you navigating those complications?
I think a lot of times we're having a lot more critical conversations about the impact on our students, and having the need to engage with our teams, with our faculty, with our staff in different areas of the college to, think critically about how our students are being impacted, and kind of thinking about who do we need to connect with at the college to support those students. I think we've had to kind of triage quickly as issues get raised. And I know as a dean, I'm frequently getting emails from faculty saying, oh, well, my students need this resource, or I'm finding out that a student has a parent who lost their job, and so they're not sure if they can stay in my class. And us having to move quickly to think about, okay, who do I know where and what entity in the college could be a resource for additional support. So I think it's forced us, though we're working in this remote environment, to have to think about how we can quickly move to support students who may be experiencing different forms of crisis as a result of the pandemic. And so it's definitely something that has brought to light even more so the importance of our work and who we serve and what we can do to move to serve, making sure that our students have what they need to be successful.
I think too, we could also point to the fact we have gotten federal CARES Act money, but like all institutions, and we've been trying to be very thoughtful about how we can best impact as many students as we can. We've worked on purchasing laptops and hotspots. Again, I think, and we had a large discussion yesterday in the bigger equity and access team about really plotting out and being strategic over the next 3 to 5 years. As Anthony said, this pandemic put a laser point on the equity gaps, but they were always there. And so students, if they didn't have a computer before the pandemic, they were not as likely to be as successful as a student that had one. It's almost impossible now. So having larger conversations about very strategically planning to be what kind of institution do we want to be, what might be larger, broader solutions to these things, I think has been brought to the conversation by having that fine point being brought to us through this pandemic lens in a way.
Mm-hmm. So Anthony also had mentioned I think it was a college CCIR. I can't remember what it stands for.
Oh, the CCRC, the Community
CCRC.
College Research Center.
Right.
Yep.
And that it really, they talk about the fact it's a redesign of the college. So you've talked about some of those elements. How do you imagine COD will be different in the future as a result of this redesign, if we can call it that?
Well, I think there's in a lot of the pathways literature and the work, there's the practice in the past of students coming to a community college and kind of the cafeteria style approach of picking courses. And I think, as an example of that, thinking about intentionality about onboarding and how are students advised on their onboarding and set up for success, how they get onto a pathway from the beginning, and then progress is monitored for success along that pathway. I think that's an example of putting us in a position where students aren't enrolled at the college longer than they need to be taking 90 plus credit hours if their goal is to transfer, and how do we help support to make sure that they are taking the classes that they need to move in progress towards their goal, whether it be a workforce ready credential or transfer. And so kind of thinking about that intentional support. And I think a lot of ways it's evolving to us not just embracing the teaching and learning of our particular disciplines or fields, but on top of that, a lot of our work is also teaching students how to do college, how to navigate our places and spaces that may be vastly different than what they've experienced historically. I've worked on new student orientation in the past and had a lot of new students to the community college and asked them on an average week of high school, how many hours a week would you spend studying outside of school? And many of them would say 0 to 5, an average week in high school, where, you come to the college environment and, it's suggested you do 2 to 3 hours per week per credit hour of one class. And that becoming kind of a shock factor of, teaching them how to navigate not just our places and services and processes, but also the methods of teaching and learning and how to do college. So I see that evolving in different ways of us thinking about our roles as educators holistically throughout all levels and interactions with students at the college.
Yeah. And I would also like to say that one thing I think we already do a phenomenal job of is help students find answers. So as large of an institution as College of DuPage is, when I joined on in 2018, I marveled at the fact that if I had a question, the staff that I brought my question to was so incredibly committed to helping me find an answer and helping solve the problem or assist the student. And so what I would like to see more formalized in a cultural sense is a very overt, I would say, campaign that equity starts with me, right? Equity starts with everyone at the college, and that more seamless referral processes for as large as we are, that we're all educated on different departments. I know that our Teaching and Learning Center has started offering departmental information sessions. So that's, they may be monthly or weekly. For example, I run the placement area, and so I work very closely actually with Cynthia's area in testing. And I think to myself, sometimes I make assumptions that people know our reading and writing placement requirements, but they don't. And as requirements change and get updated, there needs to be a strategic way to communicate about that. So wherever the student reaches out or whoever they reach out to, that person can say, I know this, I know how to help you, and I don't have to pass you off to somebody else. So I think that a very intentional and dedicated effort to saying student success starts with me, no matter what department I work in, is something that, and I can see that it's starting. I can see that path being forged, and I'm excited in my role as Equity Access Chair to kind of keep building that culture and that momentum.
Mm-hmm. I want to add that it also calls for us to be more flexible. I mean, many of us are former faculty members, and we know we like to have our syllabus, we like to have our policies as administrators, and we don't want to veer from that. But this has taught us that we have to be more flexible. And so student success means that we understand the backgrounds of our students, the diverse backgrounds they have, and that everyone has a different need. Everyone it's not cookie cutter. So we have to understand there are times to be flexible and time to stick with the policy, but there's times to change the policies to ensure that students are successful and that faculty and staff are successful at serving the students as well. Mm-hmm. So we need more internal policies that are flexible as we work with our students.
Mm. So this really does sound like a very significant redesign. Mm-hmm. Right. I was also curious, since the idea of this social justice perspective was mentioned, could you unpack that a little bit? What does that mean to have a social justice perspective?
I could start because Pathways really is, that Pathways movement was really built on a social justice platform. So it was after looking at those same kind of gaps and the same kind of futures of students who wholeheartedly went into a college door and said, I'm excited, I paid my tuition, I'm ready to go. And you can picture, let's say you picture 100 people showing up at your door. And then because of circumstances or because of not understanding college or not being completely financially ready, they might be one paycheck away from not being able to continue. You start to see them fall off. And now you can look at that same group and you see maybe 29 of those students get through. And so it was a call to, particularly community colleges, and the Gates Foundation got behind this, and a lot of different people across the nation got behind it and said, this is not right. We cannot set people up. Those people also walked away with owing loans, not having a future, feeling completely disheartened that they were just not going to be able to do anything. And so that whole notion of social justice from the guided pathways was really the basis of this just can't continue, and have a country that's going to go forward, have people ready for workforce, and continue to build families and, you know, strong families and communities that are going to thrive. So that's really kind of where that started, and then a lot of other things have come to play.
And you know, I also think that the mission of the community college is to promote social justice. I think, to Anthony's point, for the longest period of time, community colleges prided themselves on access. Okay, this university or this college didn't accept you, we will take you. And to Anthony's point, but it was arranged as a cafeteria model. So here's all your options. It's really up to you what you want to choose. And I think that that wasn't a sustainable plan because, you know, the students weren't seeing that return on their investment. Well, you know, it's overwhelming for me. Where do I start? And, you know, to that point, we're not doing those students a service. I think that if community college wants to, you know, see itself or pride itself on the key to upward mobility, right? We have to address the systemic barriers that the students arrive with. You know, just to share a story that kind of, you know, paints a picture for it. You know, my father was an immigrant, came over from Mexico, grew up incredibly impoverished in the city in a 2-bedroom apartment with 8 people, family of 8 in a 2-bedroom apartment. And he had dreams of going to college, and UIC was 2 blocks away from him. He saw it being built in the 60s. And, you know, for the lack of that college knowledge, the resources, a combination of systemic barriers, his next step became the military. And so if we still want to see college as that opportunity, as that path to achieve your goals, just offering access isn't strong enough, right? We have to look at that full picture. Conversations that pop up once in a while are about whether or not community colleges should offer daycare. Because that seems to be the reason why some of my students don't persist or have frequent absences. So if we really want to see the mission of the community colleges as social justice, then we would also want to acknowledge and incorporate the, you know, acknowledge there's a systemic barrier, and this is the support that we can offer you. I think social justice also manifests itself as just-in-time support, right? Emergent support. So that instead of, you know, having students wait for supplies or wait for things that they need, we kind of have them at the ready, so that, you know, if something happens, they don't have to figure it out. You know, again, that goes back to that cafeteria model. Well, I'm here, but what can you do to help me? I'm waiting. And I see the enthusiasm and excitement about offering that tailored just-in-time support. I think those are some of those small measures that actually have a really big impact on social justice.
Mm-hmm. I think another example on top of that would be the college's work on OER, open educational resources. So as a lot of our faculty, as an example, are spending time identifying potential resources that could be either free or low cost to students, that they have ready materials on day one of the class. You know, sometimes we hear stories of students who are navigating financial aid processes or other things to get materials that, you know, if they don't have their materials within the first few weeks, their likelihood of success can decline as time goes on without the necessary materials. So OER is one example of a way that this model could help students to be successful on day one with their materials, engaging in the academic material of their respective disciplines, and from a service perspective too, that students have the ability to really engage right off the bat in their materials. So definitely an opportunity and one example of how this might meet the needs, particularly of students who also maybe for whatever reason can't apply for financial aid. I know I had trouble applying for financial aid because my mom was so embarrassed of her tax returns that she didn't want anybody to know what she was earning. So it took a lot of convincing to get her to supply me the numbers so I could apply for financial aid. And navigating that is, you know, those processes, I didn't think I learned about the financial aid process until after I got to college and then got the bill and said, oh, wait a minute, I have to pay for this. So, you know, kind of navigating those unknowns as often a lot of our either low income or first generation college students may experience in their onboarding to the college environment.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like built into managing equity initiatives is also an element of socio-emotional challenges. And so I wondered, how is the initiative addressing those socio-emotional challenges, or how is that being discussed?
One area one thing that we've added are navigators. And so navigators work in sort of a caseload. They do work in a caseload environment. And so they are assigned all new incoming students. It's going to take a while for us to catch up with having all students have a navigator, but they do a lot of that sort of screening where they employ some questionnaires, they have conversations, they find out about some of those maybe extra emotional needs or find resources. They will refer back to our counselors who are expert at the emotional and social side of counseling. And so the navigators are kind of the first go-to person to kind of help them sort a little bit. So I think that's one of the things that, through pathways and through some conversations and through some national models we have added that I think can help at least triage that for students so that we can get that some of that information to help them better.
Okay. So Dr. Caputo, I'm curious, this is a pretty tight timeline, 5 years. So do you feel that these gaps can be eliminated in that time frame?
That is a very good question, Lauren. Now, the gaps, first we should start by saying that the gaps vary between the different groups. So some gaps are larger than others, and some are probably easier to close than others. So the short answer to your question is we certainly hope so. And I think we've got a better chance of success on some in that 5-year time frame than others. But also these goals are aspirational. So it's something we really certainly hope to do. And if we don't make it by a year or something, that doesn't mean we stop. We keep working. So perhaps we get there in the following year. And the other aspect of the equity plan is that it is a plan that is evolving. We've got a version of it right now. We've got a set of strategies that we believe will work. But as we learn more, we will make changes to the plan and adapt our strategies. For example, you may be aware that we're trying to develop a capacity for predictive analytics that kind of helps us understand what kind of interventions that we have or what kind of behaviors on the part of the student lead to success. So as we get better data, we would hope that more solutions present themselves and we can adapt those and enhance our chances of getting to the goal on time or as quickly as possible.
And I wondered if, well, let me ask a different question. Lisa, I'm going to toss this one to you. How will we know if we're successful in our efforts at eliminating those equity gaps?
So part of belonging to ILEA is that we are working with a large statewide data set that we all had to agree to give our data. And so all of the participating schools have that. And that group is helping us always analyze and disaggregate that by the outcome we're after and by the institution. So that will be part of the benchmarking and certainly part of the benchmarking across the state. At the same time, our own research and analytics group have developed several dashboards. Some of them were first brought together for guided pathways like momentum points and different things like that. But after really the ILEA initiative more targeted the demographics that we're looking at, we're making sure to disaggregate all of those by the demographic groups and keeping our own record of what's happening. So we've got the state data and then we've got our local dashboards. So we're going to know, but as Dr. Caputo said, it's not going to be over just getting there. I mean, if we ever get all these closed, then we just want to make all graduation rates go up, right? So it's just going to continue. The work's going to continue.
Okay. And I just as a last comment, I wondered if each of you might be able to briefly, since we don't have a lot of time left, explain or share one takeaway that you think is important for viewers, listeners, audience members to carry with them as they leave our roundtable today.
Well, I think I'd like to start there, and that is that this initiative of the equity plan, student success, pathways, and so on, is a comprehensive calling, if you will. It's all of us really need to get involved from our various aspects of the institution in order to support the students, and virtually everyone has a role in this. So as we go forward now, we may not have identified all of those roles just yet, but it will start to become apparent as we keep progressing in our work here. So it's not something you can sit on the sidelines about. You're going to have to get involved. Some of your procedures within your offices or your operations may need to be adapted or changed so that they better support the student, both from an equity perspective and from a general perspective of student success, because that's what we're here for.
I'll just add that, it's just great to see that there are some tangible outputs, some tangible initiatives that we can see. It's not just talk, that we are actually we have an action plan, and we have some action items, and we have some tangible initiatives. So there's some energy around all of this too. That's what I appreciate. And maybe you can sense that among us, that we are excited about what we're doing. Jill keeps us on our toes with our meetings to keep us engaged in the processes, that we don't lose sight of what we're here to do. And so I think the community should know that we are truly committed, and they will have some outcomes to be able to gauge whether or not we did what we said we were going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for the shout out, Cynthia. I appreciate it. I have to, return that praise with and echo it, that the big takeaway for this has been the level of dedication to lean into the work despite the discomfort. And I think, especially now when things are so compounded by the complexity and the difficulty of COVID-19, we have been resilient and still showing up to the work, and being willing to look in the mirror and look critically, right? And instead of avoiding it or casting it aside, confronting it. And that's something that's assuring to me. And it's a culture I've been accustomed to in former organizations. And so I hope that my role as team chair is to get people more acclimated and to get my colleagues more comfortable with being okay with looking bad, for example. We always want the gold star. We always want our work on the fridge. But that sometimes, looking at something and not being happy with it and promoting a change and instituting that change is just as rewarding and ultimately transformative. And from a social justice perspective, knowing that that's the goal, to me is really what keeps my passion for the work going. And like I said, I'm just happy to keep people and be surrounded by folks who feel the same way.
Well, and to build on that, I think, as we think about our cultural and organizational development as an institution and as a community, that, a lot of this work is really, it's challenging. It's hard work, and it's hard to work. It's really about our passion for what we do in higher education, what we do for our students, what we do for our community. But, in terms of looking back and being reflective, these are opportunities for us to both be vulnerable and to build trust, to admit that we don't know everything there is to know about closing these gaps, to be willing to engage, to ask critical questions, to trust as colleagues and community members that there's a willingness to engage, a willingness to learn, a willingness to admit what we don't know, and to learn and build from there. So I see all good things moving forward. I'm excited to see the outcomes that Cynthia was talking about, and seeing what it is that we do to create the COD of the future, and excited to see how a lot of our work will play out in the outcomes for us as an institution and for our students.
Yes, I would just wrap it up by saying that I've been really proud. I've been really proud of our leadership. I've been really proud of our faculty. In the pathways work and the equity work, faculty are center, and they have brought so much, and they're the ones that are interacting with students the most on a day-to-day basis. So I just really want to say that our students have been so engaged. So we have had students on almost every one of the teams. Our students have done the Chaps Unite conversations. And so I think we are at a critical point. And I was just talking to someone the other day about like our online learning. The pandemic has almost been an opportunity. This moment in time has become an opportunity. As hard it has been, or as scary as it might be, it is a huge opportunity to make real change and make things better, and really focus on some areas where we really need to help some people. So I just want to keep going on, and I just want to compliment everybody for being, really willing to come up to the plate.
And I feel very good about this group of leaders that we've got here and elsewhere within the equity team and the larger Pathways organization. They do an extraordinary job, and I definitely feel we are moving the ball forward.
Well, thank you all very much. This has been both an enlightening and invigorating and exciting conversation about how COD is moving into the 21st century in teaching and learning and equity and inclusion. And it's been my pleasure to be here with you today. I've really enjoyed it. And thank you so much for all of your ideas and insights. And for anyone listening, please feel free to leave comments and questions below, and we will be sure to direct those to the appropriate members of the team. And we're looking forward to more conversations with members of the equity team. And we hope that you will join us in both winter and spring for more of those conversations. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.